Hi. Hey, Sarah. So glad to have you here. Okay, so for the audience that is viewing this, this is an additional recording that goes with our arts recovery through anti-racist action video recording. And today we're so glad to have Sara Porkalob join us. This is again through the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. It is funded through the federal ARPA funds, and a very gracious thank you to Mayor Bruce Harrell and our acting director, Royal Alley Barnes, as well as many of the community supporters, which you'll find down in the summary section of this video. We really, really appreciate all of the community support and the different partners like the Surdna Foundation for making all of this possible. My name is Hsieh, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am an Asian American woman with light colored skin, long wavy black hair, and I'm against a cream colored background with, you could see a little bit of my plant on the side. And I am joined today by the amazing Sara Porkalob. Would you like to introduce yourself, Sara?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Kathy. My name is Sara Porkalob. My pronouns are she and they. I am a medium tanned woman with long wavy black hair like Kathy. My backdrop is my studio apartment here in New York. You can see a little bit of my plant as well as my black dresser and my furniture in the background. I am an artist, storyteller, and cultural worker, and I am proud to call Seattle my home. Literal home and creative home. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Sara, for joining us in your incredibly busy schedule. So this session today is part of the video Arts Recovery Through Anti-Racist Action, in that we've all, especially in the arts and cultural sector, have been going through a lot for the last 3 years because of the pandemic, because of the racial awakening that this country had. For people who are not aware, after the murder of George Floyd, and arts and cultural organizations, of course, were the first sector to be shut down when the pandemic started, out of a concern for safety and collective action towards the protection of the people who live here. And it was also the last sector to really open up, especially in the performing arts. And during that time, I think a lot of organizations who didn't necessarily realize the depth and extent of the harm and trauma that racialization in this country, and especially for people who live, who experience a lot of inequities that due to their social identities, realize how much, well, to put simply, harm happens to people who work in this industry and across all industries because of structural and systemic racism. But a lot of arts and cultural organizations, especially here in Seattle, did really want to learn more and do more to, now that they realize what trauma so many people who have been furthest away from justice have experienced, how we could change the systems. And really the first part is really interrogating ourselves and our organizations and seeing what actions we can take to become more racially and intersectionally equitable in how we do things. And many of us really feel strongly that the only way to do that is to really center the people. So people over process, people over product, people over profit. Because once you center the people first, it's the people who are our most valuable resource in our arts and cultural organizations. And it is through centering the humanity of all the artists and the staff workers and the people in the audience that attend all of our arts and cultural events that we're going to recover. And so we've been asking a lot of artists of the global majority and culture workers of the global majority to share some of their experiences so that we can all move forward together. And Sara has graciously agreed to spend a little time with us today. So I have a few questions for Sara, and we'll just dive into the first one. So what are some of the actions and strategies that we as people of the global majority are seeing that arts and cultural organizations have actually either started to, or maybe some of those bright outliers who have always been doing, that are actually moving us more in a direction that is intersectionally anti-racist and more human-centered, that we want people to keep on doing or encourage more arts and cultural organizations to start doing?
So I will say some of the most visible actions that I have seen arts and culture organizations taking in an attempt to move towards this kind of intersectional anti-racist work has been macro. I'm talking like macro things, and then we'll get a little bit more granular. The most visible actions that I've seen are institutions removing barriers so that different levels of accessibility are available to people of the global majority. So that's the first one, is removing barriers. The second is internal restructuring, specifically so that positions available for hire are now prioritizing people of the global majority. So removing barriers, internal restructuring, and then external messaging. There's been so many arts and cultural organizations in Seattle explicitly, and I'm starting to see it happening now more nationally, where the external messaging, whether that be an institution's mission statement, whether it be their call for artists because they have grant openings, whether it be positions for hire, a lot of people are, or a lot of organizations are changing their messaging so as to signal to the community at large that they're an institution that is interested not only in serving, but hiring and collaborating with folks of the global majority. So in a nutshell, removing barriers to create access, whether that be for community engagement, hiring, etc. Another really actionable item has been theaters making their plays streamable, right? That's removing a barrier to accessing the art at a theater. The other one is internal restructuring to change the demographic and the makeup of the staff of an organization. And then the third is external messaging to communicate to the community and world at large that they're trying to change their culture.
Cool, thank you.
Mhm.
Besides because I agree, streaming has actually something that so many organizations learned during the pandemic that has actually become something that should continue to go on because it's created greater access. Are there any other examples, like even like in your own personal experience, where you saw like, wow, that was actually a really great strategy to remove a barrier that might have been perceived or been actual for people before, that you can think of?
Yeah, I will say, I'm doing this contract right now on Broadway with 1776, and we're a cast entirely made up of femme, trans, and non-binary identifying folks. And there have been a couple of people in the cast specifically working with the different theaters to create resources specifically for our audiences regarding pronouns, gender identity, as well as creating signage and educating the staff to make specifically bathrooms more accessible for non-binary trans folks at our theaters. So that's one thing that I'm considering as well, because while we are focusing rightfully so, on the social identifier of race and creating anti-racist culture. We also know that intersectional identity is an amalgamation of many social identifiers. And I think that we can't talk about anti-racist work without considering all of the social identifiers that are further away from justice. And in this instance, we're talking specifically about trans and non-binary folks who are often invisibilized or dehumanized when it comes to really basic human rights, such as access to a bathroom. So that's one example that I've seen specifically in my experience with my current contract.
Cool, thanks. I'm bringing up some specific examples because I know in the follow-up from our other video, people were really craving more of that. I will just offer also one in parallel with that, is that more and more people, when they're putting out their hiring notices, whether it's for casting for theaters or for jobs, a huge request from people in general, but especially from people of the global majority, is really identifying what is that pay rate, what is that pay scale, because just having that transparency helps people make the best decisions for themselves on what they have the capacity to apply for. And so that's just one small step forward that can really help. The other thing that I'm noticing that a lot of that seems to be really helping a lot of people when they come into a process is just being more responsive in terms of letting people know the status of where they are in the hiring process. So even if someone is being considered for a job or for any kind of job, that if there's going to be a much longer timeline or any shifts in that, just being really transparent throughout the process so that, again, people aren't just waiting and not being able to make themselves available for other projects in the process. So just even small steps like that can make a huge difference in terms of creating access. And more arts and culture organizations in particular that I've seen, they've been doing more outreach, like intentional outreach, where they've been hiring people that represent the communities that they're trying to reach to, engaging them and resourcing their time to help support organizations that might not have as deep a relationship with some of those communities, like the transgender community, like the disability community, and really paying connectors in those communities to help them find the people that they're looking for so that they actually have a stronger applicant pool to begin with. Okay, another question was, what are some actions, just so that, you know, as artists and as cultural workers, we have some agency in the process. Do you have any tips or advice on what people of the global majority, others who have been the furthest away from justice, can do either as our own self-care or things that we can do to really advocate for some of these changes that are so necessary for our well-being?
We are the strongest advocates for ourselves and each other. One thing that I've had to really unpack the last 5 years of my life. So for those watching, I'm 33. And when I was 27, I suddenly moved into a position of power and privilege when it came to artistic decision making. I was aligned with an institution who gave me resources, who gave me a salary, and who gave me a platform. So I went from an individual with a platform this large, transitioning into a relationship with an institution with a platform this big with so many resources. And at that time in my life, prior to this relationship with this institution, I unconsciously saw institutions as these behemoths, these monoliths. And I saw them for that reason because where I stand in my politics, I was very, very aware of this capitalist white supremacist society that hurts all of us. And I was looking at an institution like the enemy. And I was looking at the system like the enemy. Because in many ways they are. Many ways they are. And what I've had to do in the last 5 years, because I've been in a position of power, I've been aligned with an institution, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, With this much power and resources comes responsibility. There are a lot of people who don't think about that. I want to be one of those people who thinks about that. Just because I have more access to power doesn't give me license to remove any system of accountability from my own process, right?
Yes.
So once I became aligned with an institution, I was like, oh my God, Sara, institutions are made up of people. Just because these people work for this institution that I think is the enemy, the people in the institution are not my enemy. They're actually being controlled. They're being complicit too, yes, consciously and unconsciously, within an institutional culture that holds all of us hostage.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute. This really means that we're all in this together, actually. And while we all are in it together, we have to constantly track where power sits in our identity, where injustice sits in our own unconsciousness. That like, yes, I'm a person of color, but I can still have unconscious internalized racism against people of the global majority, right? That
Yep.
just because that person in a position of leadership is a person of color doesn't mean that they're a hero, but we also shouldn't make them a martyr. It also means that they're going to be held accountable to a different standard, perhaps, than their white predecessor.
Right.
So all of this to loop back around and to say, like, what is something that we can do? We can always exercise our agency and practice articulating our truth. Now, when I say articulating our truth, what I mean is, no, you don't have to go on the corner of the theater and then shout all of your opinions to the world. You don't have to stand up to every person who throws a microaggression at you. First off, that's like so much labor. Second off, is that really serving you? Many cases, no. In some cases, it might. But when I say we need to practice articulating our truth, what I'm saying is articulating your truth is actually a skill set. And like any skill set, you must practice it in order to deepen and diversify the skill set. And our agency is something that people can never take away from us.
Yes.
This is something 10 years ago when I graduated from undergrad that I decided to practice every single day. And I made a reputation in Seattle for being, at first, like the angry brown girl. People were like, why is Sara Porkalob calling herself a feminist in like 2013? 2017 rolls around and everybody's like, I'm a feminist. And I'm like, as we all should have been. That's awesome.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And people would be like, Sara has so many opinions. She's so political. And I'm like, shouldn't I be allowed to have my opinions while you're allowed to have your opinions, while that person's allowed to have their opinions, and they can all be true at the same time in the same room, even while they might rub against each other or bump against each other? But when we walk around afraid to articulate our truths, what are we really doing for ourselves? Making ourselves small, keeping ourselves under the yoke of like these systems that hurt all of us. We're missing out on opportunities not only to diversify our skill set, but really to diversify and deepen our relationships and our collaborations. Because if we're centering people, but we're constantly like this, we're only perpetuating what white supremacist capitalism wants us to do, which is to remain in our lane and to remain focused on our individual goals and to constantly and consciously and unconsciously perpetuate this like toxic scarcity mindset.
Yep.
So for the people listening, how do you practice articulating your truth? Where do you even start? You can start very small. There are like 4 ways that I can think of right now. You can practice articulating your truth literally to yourself. How do you do that? You can talk to yourself. You can go to see a show and watch something and then repeat back to yourself, man, I think that casting choice is actually like pretty harmful. You don't have to say it out loud to anybody, but if you say it out loud to yourself, or hell, go home and write it in a journal. Journaling is a beautiful form of articulating your truth. Nobody's going to read it. You can sound stupid to yourself. You can sound pretentious, but it's you literally practicing articulating your truth to yourself, first and foremost. Okay. So then there's the second one, articulating your truth to other people that you trust, whether that's your partner, your best friend, your mom, your cat. You're moving now from articulating your truth internally here. You're creating a system that is a feedback loop. You're like, okay, cool. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm feeling good about telling myself how I feel. Fantastic. Now let's practice telling it to somebody else. That's actionable. Then the third step is, I will say that I don't think that social media is the perfect place to have online discourse. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
And
totally.
I don't think that it is. But I know, and I benefited from it being a tool in which you can practice articulating your truth to a larger group of people. And what's beautiful about that is you actually have the choice to like put it out there and then disengage. Some people might say that that's irresponsible, and I won't disagree with them. But while there is like that aspect to it, there's the benefit, right? If we can practice articulating our truth, even to the online world, that is still deepening a skill set. And if you make a mistake, what's beautiful is you're going to learn from it and you're going to integrate that back into your process.
Yes.
Right? And with each of these steps, articulating to yourself, articulating to people you trust, and then practicing articulating to the world at large, you are going to get so much feedback and an audience response that your next step is to intake that and to process it, because that's where the learning actually happens.
Yes, it's that growth learning mindset.
And this is where we need community so that the learning doesn't just spin on the mouse wheels, doesn't just put us into depression or doesn't put us into anxiety. This is where community to hold space for one another, whether that's an affinity space, whether that's a book club, whether that's a weekly Zoom meeting with your best friend across the country. This is where we need people to like see us in all of our humanity and imperfections and to like hold that space of learning so that we can really lean into the scary stuff, the humbling stuff, because it's only by moving through that we actually get better.
Yes. Yeah. And one thing that I have been noticing a lot through the pandemic is that a lot more people are actually leaning into seeking out counseling and therapy, and that we shouldn't stigmatize mental wellness and utilizing those resources, because it is so vital for us to process with other people. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't feel comfortable processing with people that sometimes getting a professional to support your mental well-being is so important, and definitely should not be stigmatized the way it has been traditionally in our society.
Yeah.
Because it's a healthy thing. It's towards your own personal health, and that is really critical.
Yep. Yes, it
Um,
is.
Thank you for sharing that, Sara. And I love the way you articulate things so clearly. What are things that, so I'm going to ask it in two parts. The first part is that there are definitely things, as much as many arts and cultural organizations have really, I mean, part of the reason why we're doing this video is because so many arts and cultural organization staff leaders have reached out and said, we really want to do better. We really know we need to do better, but we're not even sure where or how to begin. And so a lot of organizations have taken some baby steps, or at least have started doing some internal training and conversations about what it means to be more anti-racist and more accessible and more inclusive and more human-centered. But there are also, in that rush to reopen and to start doing things again, it's always easy to fall back on the status quo. This is how we've always done things, and this is how we know how to do things. So even as we strive in our hearts, in our brains, like knowing we need to do better, it's always easier to just kind of do what's the habit. And so are there certain things that are a part of the status quo that absolutely should not continue, and that need to change, that we're still seeing are happening, that maybe that are harmful to the humans that make all this work happen?
Silence. And I'll share from my personal experience very recently. in the beginning of October, I did an interview with Vulture magazine here about the process regarding the show that I'm currently in, the revival of 1776. The writer reached out to me because they were very familiar with my work in Boston, the Dragon Cycle, and they specifically wanted to have an interview with me as a multi-hyphenate. I direct, I produce, I write, and I act. I'm a multi-hyphenate artist, and I'm the kind of artist who, no matter what position I'm in and what primary hat I'm wearing, my artistic process and how I show up to the room is somebody who's always thinking about all the things. And I was really excited to talk about this process, considering it was not only my Broadway debut, but because of the nature of the script, which is a revival specifically about the founding fathers that was specifically cast this year with femme, trans, non-binary folks, many of us people of the global majority. The interviewer asked me questions about the process, and I, in very typical Sara Porkalob fashion, in a way that's very familiar to my community in Seattle, was very candid, very frank, very confident, and very honest. And when that interview was published, I did not expect not only the size, but the polarization of the response to the article that came. I was pretty quickly, in a week, like the most famous, or I should say, most infamous and hated person on Broadway. And I received so many messages of hate and so many messages of support. And what I learned is that I had broken an unwritten rule of Broadway culture, which is don't talk badly about the show when you're in the show. I had also blown many minds based on the mere fact that I am a woman, I am a person of color, and that I'm new to Broadway. And many people were stumped and confused as to why I would speak so honestly about the show and, in their opinion, throw my cast and creative team under the bus, thereby jeopardizing the success of this revival. And what happened after that is I was met with institutional silence for many weeks. Though the institution did reach out to me when there were media asks to get further interviews with me and other people from the creative team, they were largely asking whether or not I was interested, but coupled with that, then they were asking how I was doing. And still have had some silence from members on the creative team. And it was hard, Kathy, because I don't regret anything that I said.
Right.
And I said all of those things with care and compassion, not only for my team, but for the process.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that nobody has been talking like this openly in New York. And I think the timing of it all, people took offense with the fact that the show had just opened. People will wait to say things like this until after the show is opened. But you know me, Kathy.
Yeah.
That when it comes to the work, I want to be frank about it. And here's the thing. I have a lot of respect for my castmates, and I have so much respect for the creative team. And there's so much in that article that I said in the room that so many of us knew and saw, that it was clear to me that there was a culture that I was inside of that perpetuated silence and lack of transparency in the name of
Right.
a show succeeding.
Yeah. And I mean, I have to, I'm just going to jump in really quickly. I have to tell you that when I read your article, I could feel, now I know you, of course, but I could feel like what I read in that article was I read about someone who was so passionate about the work and about any process that you're in. I mean, I've done shows with you in different hats, your different hats and my different hats, and the thing that I've always felt from you is so much respect for the work, that respect requires honesty. Like, how can you have any relationship with anybody without honesty if you're giving true respect, right? in my mind, like, it's when you're being dishonest and hiding things and not saying the truth, that's disrespect in any relationship. So when I read that article, it's like, wow, that is like, I was so admiring of how much respect you gave, not only to the production, to the process, to the artistic uh, leadership, and to all of the cast and crew. And you mentioned, I mean, I saw very clearly, you mentioned how much you loved the people, and anyone who cares about work, to give it that much respect, to be honest. That to me is like amazing. And I do like, then of course I followed all the after effect, and I think that's exactly what it was. People were upset, because it was some sort of code of conduct that had been established, that has never been written down in any formal thing, like this is a requirement in your contract, whatever. It's like this culture thing, which is unsaid, and that so much of white supremacy culture functions that way, where there's these expectations that somehow have been approved by certain people, and if you don't follow that to the core, but it's never written down anywhere, then somehow you are not considered ethical or right, when it's the exact opposite. We're trying to actually be honest and frank and tell the truth, and that ironically, that's what's seen as disrespect, when I just see that as the ultimate form of respect, when you're being honest.
And yes, and what's so hard, Kathy, is that people here know that the thing that kind of like gaslit me a little bit, to be honest, was the like, I literally had people being like, what you said could tank a show. And yes, it was true, but you should have waited until after. And I had people be like, I have people who aren't coming to see the show. I have friends who aren't coming to see the show because of what you said. And I'm like, is that my problem, or is that your friend's problem? Like, and the hypocrisy that was living in the whole process. And it's like, people aren't used to this kind of transparency and honesty. So the idea of somebody sitting there and saying all of this and actually caring about the work, do you know how many people were being like, she's such a narcissistic, arrogant bitch, she's so self-serving? And I'm like, I
And you're
can't.
the exact opposite of that,
Yeah. And
from
I'm like,
all
well,
my experiences working with you.
and I'm like, it's because you actually don't see people being this honest about the work, actually being this honest in the name of doing the work. The kind of honesty that you're used to is the talking shit in the dressing room.
Which to me is like, that's where we're not being completely honest. We're saying one thing to certain people and a very different thing to other people, or just like you said, being silent about it overall.
And I'm like, I get it, because even talking shit, I think, is like a skill set that like Chisme being like, I want to feel comfortable talking to another person. And then what we all have to think about is like the next step, which is like, okay, if I want things to change, if I actually want things to change, then that means that this kind of honesty and frankness, right, has to move out from behind closed doors and into rooms where people are ready to come up with solutions, or to even, first off, to create a space where they're ready to even listen to that kind of
Exactly, to listen
to
first.
listen. And I came into this process, this is what I'm realizing. I came into this process from a very privileged position, Kathy. You know this. Like, Diane Paulus saw me in my own work and said, I want you in the show. And I have never had any desire to go to Broadway, to be a Broadway actress, because I was aware of the capitalist machine that it was. And I wasn't willing to compromise my artistic beliefs and process for this culture. But when she came to me and said, this is the concept, and I thought, this is the room where I feel like my voice would be useful. Hell yeah, I'm gonna go. And I do feel like my voice is useful. And like I said in the article, I don't think that this play can do everything. And it's really important for us to be very realistic about what a piece of text or a story, especially one that was written decades ago, can do for us today.
Right.
Otherwise, we try to do everything, and then we don't trust the like things that it is able to handle, such as this incredible cast.
Right.
And
the
yeah.
irony is that I actually think that article and your interview and your responses and everything that came out of it probably actually created more interest in the show overall, of people who might not have even thought about seeing it, wanting to go see it. I know my brother actually flew to New York after that article, and
Yeah.
he had an opportunity and he wanted to go see the show because of that, even more so, whereas that wasn't something that was necessarily, and yeah, so that's the irony of this whole thing of people shutting you down because they felt like it was a way that was losing tickets. I actually think it did the exact opposite.
And it was hard, Kathy, because when I was met with silence instead of engagement, even though deep down I knew that I had spoken my truth, I suddenly felt so alone. I was like, ooh, what did I do wrong? I'm ready to be accountable. And I sent an email to the staff, to my cast, right? And I put things out on social media where I was like, okay, yep. I'm trying to learn what I did wrong to the people that I want to be accountable to, not to the like middle-aged, like gay white guys who are sending me
Right.
all this fucking hate mail. Like, I'm not accountable to them. Fuck them. But everybody else, I'm like, okay, I want to be accountable to you. I want to know what I did wrong. I can do self-investigation. And then a lot of the learning requires, like I said earlier, community. And I was like, where's the community? I've like shown up in the room and I've been there and I'm ready for the community. And very little. There
Yeah.
was like 2 people in my cast who did the emotional labor, who like showed up for me. And I'm like, I'm so thankful for them. I'm so thankful for them. But I'm not gonna lie, that like feeling of being pariahed and alone, I felt as if I didn't deserve somebody from the team even standing up for me and going, how are you?
Yeah. No, this is really good. I actually think that in all of our arts and cultural work, we need to, especially the leaders in institutions, because unfortunately most of our arts and cultural organizations are modeled after the corporate structure, which is modeled after that whole white hierarchical,
Right.
top-down system, which, to be honest, has never worked for over 99% of anybody, um, let alone people who have been furthest away from justice. Um, but that one of the strategies that more arts and cultural organizations can do, is really to create spaces where staff can connect with each other, listening spaces, and not just when a crisis has happened, but in general. We need more touch points, especially after this pandemic, and still people are working very remotely, staff wise. I mean, even as like arts and cultural organizations, obviously the artists have to come together in a space to get the show up, but a lot of staff are still remote, and that has, I think, created even greater distance than before.
Mm.
And so it is vital to have opportunities where people can connect as human beings, to just check in. How are you doing? How
Yeah.
are, like, to ask your staff, like, how are they doing, and really, really want to know what the answer is. And if they have the courage, because it takes a lot of courage to speak up about stuff, if they have the courage to tell you, as leaders of an organization, this is how it's feeling or landing on me, and then is to really listen to that, and know that anyone who cares enough to speak the truth about what might not be going well, that's a gift to any organization who truly wants to evolve into something better. Is not to shut that down, but to actually encourage, like, how do we then become responsive to the needs of our staff? Because when we're responsive to the needs of our staff, then they're able to function to their fullest potential. And then that translates into, like, the rest of the patrons, everyone that the staff and the artists connect with, where it does really ripple out in a positive way, but only it has to start with the people that are actually carrying out the work of the organization first. They have to be happy doing the work, because otherwise it's just a ripple effect going the opposite way.
Yeah. And what I will say is that it took a little over a month for the institution to come up with like some steps,
Good.
to create community space, to have like a community meeting, to then have like a restorative justice session.
Right.
And those things happened, and I'm thankful for them. They were largely in service of everyone else, which makes sense. You know, a lot of people in my cast felt harmed by the article and by the things that I said, and I want to be accountable to them. So I'm glad that we had those spaces for sure. And as a person who like said those things, you know, I'm still struggling with in my mind. I was like, how are those meetings helpful for me?
Yeah.
What
No,
did it teach
it's real.
me? They humbled me for sure, but I'm worried, and I'm trying to track this. Like, I'm worried that whenever the opportunity comes again to be honest about a thing, that my mind is gonna like be triggered and be like, oh, well,
Yeah.
you can't say what you really want to say because people are gonna be mad. And that's like never stopped me. I think though that what has become clear is that especially on Broadway, like people's livelihoods are at stake. Even in the case of our show, which had a closed-ended run, which means we're not going on forever because there's the national tour. Even in that case, that, you know, we're not extending. We're closing on January 8th, and we could have extended until the end of January. And there are definitely people who think that we're not extending because of me, because of the article. And I'm like, you know, there's a part of me that's like, where's the empirical evidence? Let's see. But there's also a part of me that's like, even if there was empirical evidence or not to disprove that, the fact remains is that people feel this way towards me, which signals to me, this is how big the system is.
Yeah.
This is like the capitalist system. That's like, people literally can't tell the truth without being punished. And it wasn't like it's not like I'm uncovering a big scandal. There wasn't any big
No.
scandal. Instead, I just had issues with some of the directing choices. And there was one instance where I was like, the best of intentions are here, and unintentionally something else happened. And I actually wasn't one of the POC folks who felt harmed by that. I was clear from the beginning what the approach was to molasses to rum. And a lot of people in the cast weren't clear with what the concept was. So it was about a communication breakdown issue, not about people being intentionally racist.
Right.
And I was like,
Right.
oh, we fixed it. We approached it. The directors and the people in positions of power listened, and we moved forward with consensus. And the
Yeah,
fact
that's what I read.
the fact that there wasn't any big scandal in it, and now there are people who will, no matter what I say, really be like, you took away 3 weeks of a paycheck from me. And I'm like, that's how big the system is.
Yeah. No,
That
yeah,
is
totally.
livelihoods. And you know, and that's what sucks, is it's like there's a very real possibility that like my article is the reason we're not extending. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, those people's livelihoods, right? Yeah, even though Broadway has never been my dream, working here, living in New York is expensive. And that's one thing that I'm going to think about from here on out. I won't let the truth be compromised, but the livelihood of my team, especially when I'm in a position of power, it is going to be something that I'm thinking about now.
Well, and the sad reality is that it's actually not even like, you know, this is one isolated instance, but the reality is of that system is really because capitalism and all of those things, white supremacy culture is designed to be divisive and to make everyone feel like the guilty party is the other person, as opposed to the reality that it's this structure that is really meant and designed to pocket the majority of the money in a few individuals' pockets. And I'm talking not just this, I'm talking about like that small, less than 1%, you know, the systems really benefit them, and the rest of us are actually suffering because of the system. And it really doesn't, like, even in any situation you look at, it's never about like, I mean, this goes all the way back through our history, right? Where the people were made to feel like, oh, we can't unionize, or we can't like demand, more pay, because then all of a sudden they shut the factories down and then no one has a job. And it's, oh, because those people stood up for their rights, that now we all lost our jobs, right? The system has always pitted us against each other in every single case. Throughout our whole history, and it's really, it's a system that is actually detrimental to all of us. So I mean, the other side of the question, which I think we've sort of already covered in general, is that as a result of more arts and culture organizations, trying to make some changes, like many, for instance, performing arts organizations, they used to have these things called 10 out of 12s, where right before a show opens, they have everyone working 12-hour days. And oftentimes we saw that the designers and the tech people actually were there for far longer than even 12 hours. And so many performing arts organizations have stepped back and like tried to spread that time out over a longer period. So those are like some of the small changes. And that's what we've seen from that is it then can benefit not just people of the global majority, not just people with disabilities, but it actually benefits everyone working in the system. So some things, people have been trying, but sometimes there's always unintended consequences of some of these, things that we put in place with the best of intentions, but then we realize in the practicing of it, like, oh, here's an unintended consequence that's actually harming people. Not everyone has an answer to this question, but have you seen certain things where people are trying new things, but maybe there was an unintended consequence that we just need to, again, keep on exploring different alternatives around?
Yeah, I mean, I could give you a specific example, but I want to talk about it from like a different vantage point.
Great.
It's that there are so many, whenever you're trying to change anything, like if we're talking about a skill set, right? And we're saying that moving away from transactional culture and building relational culture is actually a skill set. That means then that there's no end to developing the skill set, right? There's no end to it. It's not linear. It's not hierarchical, which is so difficult because what we're trying to do with this skill set is dismantle hierarchy. When in reality, even the ways we think about how to do stuff is hierarchical.
Yes.
So what that tells me then is like, oh, if we're trying to not only like dismantle this thing, but build something new that's better. If we're trying to do that, but even the ways we unconsciously think and consciously think and move in the world are still symptomatic of this old thing over here, doesn't that mean then that we're going to make so many mistakes?
Yes, always. And that's what part of being human is.
Yes.
It's yes.
So then maybe then what we can do for ourselves and for our community that is relational is, instead of being like, this brand new thing, this thing is going to fix this thing, we're going to try. And we actually need everybody's help to like watch how this thing, we need everybody's help to like influence what this thing even is. And then we all have to reach consensus about when it goes out into the world. And we have to like be okay with that. Be okay with maybe the fact that it's not perfect. Be okay with the fact that it's not perfect because we're learning. And then when it goes out into the world, that's actually the beginning of watching the thing. It's not the end.
Right.
And then it's like a baby, we watch it and we're like, we got to like still shape it. And if it's doing a thing that's bad for it, we got to like change it. So the answer is yes. We just have to accept that institutions and individuals in institutions and even ourselves are going to continually make mistakes, because that is what happens when we're practicing a new skill set, especially when this skill set is like being created out of nowhere in an attempt to be better for everybody.
Yes, I love that.
And we have to remove the shit. We have to practice removing the shame that's associated with making a mistake.
Giving ourselves grace.
Giving
Everyone
ourselves grace. and to be like, we can actually reframe our perspective around this
Yes.
learning opportunity. Look at how we're learning, guys. Doesn't feel good, feels horrible. But we can't live in this shame and be like, we're doing such a terrible job, because even that is a symptom of white supremacy.
Yes. It's about going, like the whole white supremacy tenet of perfectionism, of, yeah, all of that. It's just like Adrienne Maree Brown, her
Love her.
book, I do too, Emergent Strategies. That's exact.
Yes.
Everything is emergent and
Yes.
iterative, and
Yes.
we only learn by. And if you look at nature, everything evolves because you keep trying new things, and then and then you kind of shift, and it keeps on, evolving.
And who was it? I'm forgetting, like this. I need to do some research, because I thought about it the other day. Maybe it was Bell Hooks, or maybe it was Adrienne Maree Brown. This idea that when we're doing this work, and then we look at an issue of conflict through like a hierarchical lens, and we like zero in on that. That's focusing on, what's the phrase? The little argument, which is like, look at this position of power and this person with less power, and look at the thing that's happening. We really have to unpack and we have to fix it. And when we have to look at the bigger argument, which is, of course this was going to happen.
Yes.
Of course it's going to happen. And there are dynamics here at play that, yes, live at the interpersonal level, consciously and unconsciously. And there's so much at the bigger unconscious level that's influencing this, that we can actually we can look at, and that changes our perspective. It gives us a different framework.
Yes.
To look at the conflict as a puzzle.
Yes. Yes.
Not a problem. As a puzzle.
And also because sometimes people are so scared of making a mistake, in terms of trying anything to do better, that they end up not doing anything at all. And so Martin Luther King Jr. has a famous phrase, which I can never remember exactly, but the essence of it is like, that you if you don't do anything, that's actually the worst crime, right? So at least if we're trying, we might not get it right, but we're at least trying, and that will get us closer, because then we'll learn from that, and then we'll be able to adapt, and then try again, and then adapt and try again. And that's how we actually evolve as human beings, and that's how we evolve our arts and culture organizations as well.
Yes. And this was a decision I made 10 years ago. Graduating from undergrad in 2012, where I was like, it makes so much sense to me to actually try to make something rather than try to make the perfect thing.
Right.
I'm going to try to make something, and then I'm going to do it. And it's through the doing that I'm going to learn something. And 10 years later, I can say confidently that I am not afraid of making mistakes, because I've actually removed the mistake aspect from it. It's not about making mistakes. It's about learning. Yes. And I'm so excited to just like do and make. And I've built that. It's actually a muscle that I've had to build for the last 10 years. And that became so clear with the Vulture article, that this muscle that I built around doing and speaking and manifesting and learning is not something that many people have or know how to even foster in themselves, because the larger systems don't want us to grow that muscle.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, I mean, if there's any strategy I could recommend to arts and culture organizations based on what we've just talked about, it's really, and you mentioned it too, like checking in with those, especially those who've been furthest away from justice, to get their input in the decision-making process. So we work together collaboratively, collectively. Yes. Then you take those ideas and you do something with it, like make some, listen and make that happen. And then we're going to learn from it. And debrief and evaluate and then process and then try again, but with improvements, and keep on, and so that is how we all learn and evolve to become more anti-racist, and how we try to keep on thriving through this pandemic that we've gone through together, is we have to take that first step. We can't just keep watching other people trying and never really trying ourselves. We have to try that, but do it, involve the people that you're trying to work with together, so that we can do that. Is there anything else that you hot bits of wisdom from Sara Porkalob you want to add in before we close out today?
Remember to rest. Remember to rest. There's, I, again, I'm just want to like name the privilege that I have, prefacing the thing that I'm about to say next, which is I truly believe that there's no like product that has to be made that is worth compromising the mental, like the emotional and physical wellness of a person. And that when we have moments to rest, we should take them.
Yeah,
And
totally.
that grind culture, like in your 20s, it might be sexy and it might be the thing that you feel like you have to do as an artist. And, you know, here's the facts. For many of us, we do have to do it to pay our rent, to survive, right? Just like remind yourself that like you're doing it in the name of survival, and just try to find those moments in your life where you can rest.
Yeah, I mean, and the reality is that and I won't go down that rabbit hole, which was also brought up in the article, which the way I read your statement was that our life is a whole, like, if we really want satisfaction in our life, we have to look at it holistically,
Yeah.
which means as human beings, we have to find that life work balance where the work can't be everything we're doing because we're going to literally kill ourselves.
Yeah.
And you know, and so we have to find that balance of getting enough sleep, trying to you know, remember to take time for family and loved ones and relationships, because all of that, the more that we can devote to that balance of family and personal reflection and time for ourselves and rest and relaxation, that actually feeds into us
Yes.
being able to do better work when we're at work.
Yeah.
Because if we try to do 100% at work, we're burning ourselves out, and that doesn't allow us to actually even be our best at work, let alone our personal lives. So it is about, we do have to really, I know every single time I actually get a good night's sleep, I can do so much more at work in a smaller amount of time than I would have if I had just tried to like work 16 hours straight and not get that sleep. Same thing with why we encourage now, like a new culture is really trying to encourage people to take their vacations if they have them, and you know, find that time for yourself. And because if you don't do that, I mean, there's a whole bunch of studies out there that say that the more that bosses in any organization really encourage people to take care of themselves, that actually allows a greater productivity. If we're in a capitalistic society and that's what people are, you know, leaning into, that actually creates greater productivity than this work culture that somehow our American society has delved into, where the more hours means you're better. No, it actually doesn't. They've actually shown that the products that come out of those organizations, the productivity and the profit margin is actually less impactful than if you actually gave people more rest time and encouraged a culture of life work balance. And
Precisely.
so, yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sara. You are amazing as always. We know you always come from a place of love and care for your community, beyond just your own work. You've always been someone that I've so looked up to and have so loved working with. So thank you. This has been fabulous. I wish you all the best and happy holidays.
Yeah, same to you, Kathy. Thank you. Again, I look up to you so much, and I'm so thankful and excited to have had this opportunity to talk about the work and to hopefully inspire others to engage with the work in a way that feels good for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Okay.
Okay.